Joining me to unpack this is Patrick Abankwa, a financial analyst and investment advisor from Ghana. Thank you so much, Patrick, for joining me today.
Thank you, and good morning. Good morning. Good morning.
All right. Beg your pardon. I'd like you to give us an overview of the economic climate in Ghana and how the markets are reacting to the Q4 GDP figures.
I think generally for the 2023 performance of the country, we started off the year poorly because of the issues relating to the debt exchange program, which discussion started somewhere November, December of 2022. So when we started the year 2023, the outlook was quite damning and not favorable, and that led to confidence in the economy not being strengthened and really getting worse. And that led to Ghana experiencing one of its highest rates of inflation over the last 15 years, which rose up to about 50% inflation. And that transcended into the cost of living in the country and affected other industries. So going into the first quarter, second quarter, third quarter, we saw some improvement as discussions on the debt exchange program was progressing well. And I'm not surprised to see that the figures for the last quarter, which is quite an impressive performance compared to the other quarters of the year, shows that we are putting together a performance that if we're able to sustain going into the year 2024, as we have already started, we should see significant improvement over what we experienced within the same period for 2023. So I think that kind of news gives some kind of confidence to the investors who have businesses running in the country, and also people who want to come and deposit some kind of revenues in this country by way of establishing some kind of investment opportunities over here. So I think that the outlook performance is quite okay. And even though we started poorly, we are at a place that if we're able to sustain our gains, we should get better.
All right, beyond some of the factors you have mentioned or attributed this growth to, can you share with us some of the factors you think are responsible for the growth we're seeing?
So I think that the first thing has to do with increased commodity prices. So some commodity prices increased within the period, which led to increase in profit for some of the institutions that are being affected. Again, there's also improved agricultural outputs. We saw some output for some of the agricultural products within the period, as you rightly mentioned, like cocoa, also improving within the period. Then the main sector that is driving the economy, which for me has to be protected, has to do with the service sector, which also experienced some kind of growth within the period. There can also be mention of the manufacturing sector, which also grew a bit within the period that we are discussing. So for me, these are the critical things. The first one is the commodity price. Second one is agricultural input that increased within the period. Then also the continuous growth in the service sector are things that for me led to the growth that we have seen in the Q4 of 2023.
All right, let's talk about Ghana's debt, which you also raised earlier. I mean, this debt has been one of its biggest challenges, if not the biggest challenge. How is this affecting investor sentiment and even confidence in the economy? We also know that Ghana is also trying to talk to some other bondholders to see what they can do about, their restructuring that particular loan. Looking at all of these, all the debt agreements, all the restructuring and all of that, what's the sentiment? What's the vibe? How are, investors reacting to all of these?
I mean, government's inability to meet the demands of investors by way of paying their coupons and also principal that have matured, for me, it raises a bit of worry for the government because their inability to meet its financial obligations and investments in future projects leads to some kind of hesitance when it comes to new investment coming in, and also can lead to potential hinder of the economic progress that we're experiencing. With that said, I think that the restructuring program has gone so far so well, especially with the closure of the local restructuring process, which ended somewhere last year, and also discussions with private bondholders to be able to agree on some terms. I think it's progressing well. What most of these investors are looking at is government's commitment to ensure that they are putting in place the right tax system, the right fiscal discipline, the right process to be able to manage its growing expenses. If the expenses are getting to the point where they are not sustainable, and that's the reason why we went to IMF, then it still gives investors some kind of fear. But I think that the government within the period has been able to manage itself within the fiscal discipline indicators that were agreed with IMF, and that is restoring some kind of confidence that we have seen, especially if you look at the performance of the year in 2024. Investors will continue to be investors, looking at their investment and how it's protected. So that should be the focus of the government going forward in terms of promising some kind of cogent steps that they can put in place, especially when it comes to spending, especially, again, when we are in an election year in Ghana, where every election year, government goes beyond its discipline when it comes to spending. So if you're able to stay within the indicators that have been agreed with IMF, I think that these investors will begin to see government in a different light and decide to perhaps bring up back their investment or even increase their investment or even give some kind of leverage in terms of extension of their credits that they be given to the country Ghana.
All right, well, Ghana is quite optimistic, just as you are, about reaching a restructuring deal with its creditors and also hopes to emerge from what is now known as the worst economic crisis in a generation. Is this a given? I mean, is it automatic? Is it something that will just happen just because it has, solved that problem?
It may not solve the immediate problem that we need to put our minds to. Having your debt restructured is just a matter of postponing your obligations. So when the obligations are due in, let's say, 5 years, 3 years time, what are you going to do? And that's where revenue is very important. So government should be able to put in place systems to recover revenue through the Ghana Revenue Authority so that we'll have enough funds to be able to cater for the postponement of interest that we need to pay. So that's one. Two is continuous commitment towards fiscal discipline. We should spend only what we have. And that means that if there's a need for us to cut down some government expenditure, we need to do that because that's the sustained way of being able to meet these obligations that have been postponed. Again, we should also put in place a proper economic reforms to ensure that the recovery that we are expecting will be sustained. And that will lead to us bringing down issues relating to inflation, issues relating to interest rate. As we speak in Ghana, average interest rate is above about 32%, 33% for businesses. How can a business go for a loan of about 32% and be competing with an international company that is paying about 5% from their home country in the same market space? This is something that if we don't address, it's just a matter of postponing the problem to another day. If you're able to address these things, for me, the challenges that we are facing will be thing of the past in the next 2 to 3 years.
All right, so quickly, let's just talk about the major risks, China is faced with on its path to sustained growth.
Yeah, so the challenges for me is still the issue of high inflation is still quite.
Go ahead. Yes, please.
Yeah, so inflation is still quite high. At the moment, we are around 26%. I think government should put in place through Bank of Ghana to be able to bring it down to the 10, 15 region that we saw before COVID. Again, our economic growth is also quite slow. We should also work at reducing and increasing the growth of that. Then exchange rate volatility. I think that our currency is still fluctuating. From the beginning of the year up to now, our currency has depreciated about 30%, which is not good enough. And I think that effort should be made to bring that also down within a sustainable period. So that's what I think government should do going forward.
All right, thank you so much, Patrick, for sharing your thoughts with us today on Business Edge.